Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Roy Dagan, CEO and co-founder of SecuriThings. Roy has been product manager at NICE Systems, manager of product management at RSA, the security division of EMC, head of product at Capital Cadence, and security and risk strategy at Payoneer. At SecuriThings, a Microsoft venture startup, Roy leads the company efforts in working to identify and mitigate cyber threats across IoT devices. Welcome here, Roy.
Hi, Chuck. Great to be here.
Thank you. Where are you right now?
Just outside of Tel Aviv, Israel.
And is your whole company there?
Majority of the company here, and the rest is in North America.
Oh, whereabouts in North America?
Primarily at the moment in the New York, New Jersey area.
Oh, very nice. The Northeast, which is starting to get nice for weather. So I wonder if we could talk about some of the cybersecurity issues in the market today, since you've been tracking this for some time, and you've got a background in this, correct?
Yes, from RSA and other companies I worked throughout the years.
So what caused you to start this company? It was, a few years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we started the company, it was pretty early kind of in IoT, and we decided to focus on, IT cybersecurity. We back then we saw it's going to be a big thing. There were already a bunch of different devices out there. The number of devices were just growing, and we understood back then that's definitely going to be a challenge for for manufacturers, for IT providers, for end customers, and given our background and stuff we did at other companies. We decided to tackle this challenge and start with the cybersecurity aspects of these devices.
So do companies realize that IoT causes these issues with all these? You've got thousands and thousands of devices can be in just one company.
And I think that's exactly the challenge. So those numbers, the scale, right? Just the sheer magnitude of these devices scattered all over the place, across different networks, across sites, is what is causing the pain. And I can tell you that while initially our focus was, very much focused on the cybersecurity aspects of these devices, what we saw is when you get to that scale, the cybersecurity remains a big pain. But we saw that also the pain is bigger or includes other aspects of managing these devices besides cybersecurity. And that's also the operational kind of management and maintenance of these devices. And, if you're at 10, 20 devices, you're probably fine. But once you get to the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands and more, then it becomes really a liability from all these aspects. A, because you have the number of devices. B, because you have different vendors, different model, different versions. And then it just becomes, for many, many reasons, it just becomes complicated for these teams to kind of, wrap their heads around these devices and be able to manage them.
So who in an organization realizes this? Did they see it coming, especially the larger companies?
Yeah, so, in some cases it depends. And there are companies where IT is directly involved with these devices and trying to figure out how to deal with these devices. In other companies, you have teams which are, their whole responsibilities on managing these devices. So take, for example, physical security devices or building management devices. You have teams which are just focused on these devices. So making sure the devices are working properly, working with different vendors, with different system integrators on deploying these devices. And at the end of the day, it's really their responsibility to make sure everything is working properly, both in terms of, the availability of devices and making sure if there is any issues with availability, that they, make the right phone call, make sure that somebody is out there to solve that issue. But also the cybersecurity aspects of managing these devices and making sure that the devices don't pose additional risk on the organization, as well as compliance. And that's kind of, in between the IT and those departments where IT wants to know more, wants to learn what's happening with the devices, or is really mandated to do that. And the other side of the organization can provide them or potentially provide them that input that they need so much.
So what was the pattern of companies identifying this? Do they see it at the beginning of when the IoT devices started getting connected, or did it all of a sudden they wake up one day and say, "Oh, I've got all these devices and they're out of control, out of the edge here"? So
I think there was an evolution. Initially a lot of the devices were analog. Then a lot of the devices started switching to IP-based, being IP-based, and suddenly you find out that these devices are sometimes running on their corporate networks. And you need these devices up and running, right? So, for example, video surveillance devices, you need those cameras up and running. It's part of the mission critical devices of the organizations. And then you're just deploying more and more devices. And now you realize over time that, for example, you haven't upgraded a firmware version for like 3 years, 4 years. You suddenly realize, okay, there's already tons of vulnerabilities known on those devices. You also have obviously insider threat problems. You can easily access the devices within the network. So I think it was kind of evolution where devices were turning from, analog to IP, just the magnitude of the devices and more devices. And then kind of the realization that this is a big problem for the organization and it's not something that is really easy to deal with these days.
So where's the responsibility for this in an organization? Is it always the IT department? Is it a business unit? Is it a compliance officer? Where does it fall generally?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on the industry and it depends on the organization. In some organizations, we can see that it's the teams which are responsible, for example, for the physical security technologies, or the teams which are responsible for the building management technologies. And they will be responsible in some of the cases for everything, or meant to be responsible for everything. In some cases, they may be just responsible for the operational aspects. In some cases, you see that the IT are suddenly coming in and are responsible for, obviously, the cybersecurity and the compliance, and want to know more and want to know what's actually happening with these devices, especially if they're running on the same networks. And what I think is pretty interesting, and we've been seeing this more and more in the last, I'd say, year or two, when there's kind of a convergence. And, if you look a few years back, probably these teams weren't speaking with each other a lot. But these days, I think there's much more collaboration within the organizations. And they are trying, though they were kind of speaking a different language, right? The IT folks are speaking the IT language. And they know IT standards and they know IT devices. The other departments, the departments which are focused on managing the IoT devices, they know the devices, they know the management systems, they know how to measure the uptime of those devices, but they don't necessarily know the IT lingo. And that's what we're seeing in the last year or two, that the relationship are becoming, let's say, better, and they are trying to work together and see how they solve these issues together.
So is it primarily IT that drives it?
Not necessarily. So IT in some organizations may drive discovery, try to find out which devices are out there, but in many cases, it's more of the unmanaged devices which are part of the network. But then you have all these devices which are supposed to be out there, right? Your cameras, your access control systems, all the building management devices. You got to have them out there. That they're out there, and they're supposed to be always up and running. In that case, those will be other teams. It's not. What's interesting within enterprise is that if you look at the IoT devices, those are, I'd say, pretty much the only devices that don't go through IT, right? So you have your laptop, you have the server, you have many devices that go through IT and are then commissioned to different parts of the organization, whether if it's to a new employee, whether if it's the development team, or different groups within the organization. But then you have the IoT devices. Those are brought from a manufacturer, so a third-party vendor. Then you probably have a distributor. You have a system integrator, which rolls a truck and deploys the device on the network. And what happens is that device doesn't really go through IT in that process, which really makes it interesting.
So in terms of the risk, what's the bigger threat, or the bigger issue, I should say, for these devices? Is it the security of the device, or is it the management of the device?
So I'd say we're seeing different levels of concerns on those aspects in different types of organizations. So it depends on the industry and the focus of the industry and the business, but also just different customers and how they operate. In some organizations, we definitely see that the cybersecurity, even the what we call the IoT ops teams, what they're focused on is also the cybersecurity, and they're very concerned with cybersecurity. With other teams, with other customers, we're seeing it's more around availability. Okay, they need to make sure that the devices are always up and running. Yes, cybersecurity is a concern, but the top concern is, are these devices up and running? Are we always recording what's happening within the enterprise? And then I can also tell you, so something what's kind of in between in some cases, also the compliance or automation of capabilities. So let's say who's responsible for upgrading firmwares, right? So rotating passwords and things like that. In some cases, it may fall in between. But again, it depends on the organization and what they're trying to achieve or what their real concern is. Probably all organizations have a list of concerns, but then depending on the industry, you can probably kind of prioritize them and understand how they look at things, if that makes sense to you.
Oh, yeah, totally. So how does an organization keep up? If they have some number of devices, they then get them all sort of under control, but they can't control the proliferation because the devices keep coming. There's no end.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. That's what we're seeing. The trend is that organizations are just deploying more devices, and these devices are part of the organization, and that's gonna stay. So on one hand, they want to know that they have the devices and they know they have the management systems, but then they also need systems which can help them take care of those capabilities of managing these devices. So the way we see it is kind of similar to the capabilities you have on the IT side. We have all kind of systems which are managing IT devices, right? You have tools around orchestration of devices, automation, observability, many capabilities, cybersecurity, compliance, and so on. And for IoT, I'd say that's kind of what we saw is missing today. That kind of capability to take all those kind of IT capabilities and pull them together into one system, which is really focused on these devices, which are very different in essence.
Can you talk about some of the differences and similarities by industry? Like, for example, like financial services, they have security built into their DNA. So, I mean, that's sort of natural. Some other companies, not so much. Are you seeing some differences and some similarities depending on the industry?
Yes, absolutely. So, and again, I think it goes back to if you look at different capabilities or different needs. So around cybersecurity, around compliance, around availability, around how do you handle issues, and do you want to reduce cost? Like, is reducing cost a big thing for you? So definitely, we can see the differences between organizations. So a financial institution is a good example where obviously compliance is a big thing. Cyber security is definitely a big thing, and they always need to have the devices up and running, right? Cost is a big thing, but not necessarily will be like the top thing. You can see other organizations, so let's say retail, they may be in a different priority. So obviously everything will be a concern, but that may change in order. But we can really see the differences between the different types of industries and what they're focused on.
So does one company call you and say, hey, we need some device management? Or are there a lot of companies that are doing this besides your company? I mean, there's so many IoT products, it's like obscene. How does a company keep track of who they should even deal with?
Yeah, so part of what we did early on is start working with the different partners. So primarily, we're working today with large system integrators, and these system integrators have vast relationship with these organizations and exactly these types of departments. So the departments which are responsible for managing and deploying these devices, and through that channel motion, it's we get to kind of a win-win-win. So we get to find the right end customers which have that pain with the right channel partner, which is very familiar with the end customer and is also familiar with our system and our capabilities. And then we can quickly deploy the system and help the end customer.
And what is your Microsoft connection?
So we actually started in the early days. We started in the Microsoft accelerator here in Tel Aviv, and they were very helpful back then. Kind of initially, kind of launched discovery, and when we were really working on the idea and started to build the team back then. Since then, we extended the relationship. We're part of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Association, and we're doing a bunch of different activities together with Microsoft in the market.
Well, that's not a bad partner if you have to pick one.
Not at all.
Yeah. Does 5G play a role in this anywhere down the road?
Down the road, I believe so. So everybody's talking about 5G. It's definitely probably going to be a big thing. At the moment, I can tell you that we saw it. Our focus is really on an enterprise, a large organization, and customers. We haven't seen it still really deployed in those types of organizations, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be interesting, and we'll definitely see it deployed down the road. And it'd be pretty interesting how organizations or how potentially we can help organizations deal with those devices which are sitting on those 5G networks.
And are you seeing some companies or industries that are falling behind in this?
It's a good question, but I think we're kind of at the point where if you have a scale of devices, then you know you have a challenge. Again, the pain may be in a different point, but if you're over like a few hundreds of devices, then you have that pain. Because if you're a few hundred of devices, you probably also have a small team. If you're near the thousands of tens of thousands of devices, you have probably a bigger team, but still that team can't cope with that magnitude of devices because you need all the automation capabilities and so on. But I say it's pretty much across the industry. And we're kind of at the point of time where organizations are really realizing that this is a liability.
And you mentioned cameras as an external device. Are you seeing specific devices that are the riskiest things that companies need to look at first?
So I can tell you that a lot of our focus and what we decided in the last couple of years is really to focus on like physical security devices. Okay, so it's not just cameras, but it's cameras, it's access control systems, and it's other systems within the enterprise which help power these devices. And I can tell you from our experience, those are definitely a big concern. But I can also tell you at the same time that we are gradually extending our capabilities and our reach to other types of devices within the organizations because they are also a big concern these days.
And if someone is looking to intrude on a company, where do they typically go? Through which devices most frequently, and which industries are the riskiest?
That's a good question. I think it depends on really the attacker, their capability and what they want to achieve, right? The industry will be really what they want to achieve. And then the scale of the capabilities they have, it depends. We saw, obviously, there are many stories of more of the critical infrastructure devices, the building management devices, but we also saw stories from the last year around the physical security devices. So it's hard to say. It's hard for me to say if it will be this device or that device. But I think at this point of time, it's as long as you're not monitoring or you haven't upgraded or you haven't patched the vulnerabilities, it's pretty much a risk across.
And what role does artificial intelligence play in all of this?
So a big role because part of the problem is that you have a lot of devices and you have, again, the different vendors, different models, different firmware versions. And it's hard without, analytical capabilities to really understand exactly what's happening there and how you can help, whether if it's around the cybersecurity or identifying vulnerabilities or identifying attacks on the devices, also the operational aspects. So what does it mean if a device is down? Okay, it can mean different things. Is it down if it's, you just saw it down for 5 minutes? What if the rest of the devices are up? What does that mean? Maybe the rest of the devices in the same network segment are also down. So that's really maybe a problem in the network. But you need to have those analytical capabilities and use machine learning, AI, to be able to, in that scale, to be able to deal with the devices and be able to provide the right alert to the organization and identify where there is an issue, but also use those capabilities to help the organization deal and remediate that issue.
So can't AI ultimately automate all of this?
That's the goal. So that's a lot of what we're working on is exactly that.
So once you have that, or once a company has that, what else do they need? Isn't that then basically done?
So, there's always more capabilities to add and more systems. But part of the goal and part of what we're working on as a company is to use those analytical capabilities to provide that level of automation. We definitely believe that 21, 22, automation is a big part of the right solution, and AI, machine learning, all that is part of that mix.
So machine learning, and we're talking about beyond data analytics, it actually then could, a system conceivably that you might create could actually just be plugged in and automatically learn essentially what the characteristics are, and then keep learning, and then basically you as a company don't have to do anything because now the system is running itself. Is that a vision in the future?
It is a vision, but you still need to monitor those systems, right? So you put something in, you let the system learn, but you still want to tweak it. You still want to monitor it. You still want to make sure that it is tuned right for that organization. But it's definitely the path we're taking to be able to provide, the solution and the alerting capabilities and remediation as soon as possible after deployment, but also moving forward, as different devices, more and more devices are deployed. So the system is also kind of keep itself, up to speed with what's out there and what's changing within a customer environment.
So, what have you seen in the market that surprised you? I know you're dealing with a lot of companies all over the planet. That you went into a company and they described their situation. And you went, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this." Is there anything like that you've come across?
I think initially we were surprised where we saw that IT is much more involved than it was before. So initially we were speaking with more of the IoT teams, and we were surprised where we saw how much in some organizations IT is really, really involved. We saw in some organizations where, even the basic understanding if the device is up or down or which devices do I have is a concern, and it may sound trivial to you or to me initially back then. But when you kind of understand and you analyze and you understand kind of the evolution of how the devices got there and how many devices you have, it kind of makes sense after a while. And I think these kind of patterns are patterns that we're seeing at them, time after time again. So I wouldn't say at this point it's kind of a memory, but it doesn't surprise us anymore because it is a challenge.
And can small or medium companies deal with this at all? Because this stuff this whole issue is not an inexpensive proposition when you're dealing with security and operations and so forth. Should a small or medium business just ignore it because they're under the radar?
No, I don't think they should. They'll ignore it. But I can tell you that what we're working on is also a model in which we work with our channel partners, which are also serving the smaller organizations, and in which case we will be working on kind of a completely indirect model, which can serve those smaller organizations. And that also kind of goes back into the analytical capabilities. So, the more customers you have, the more there are different, you have more and more smaller customers, you need the automation and also the automation capabilities around the alerts to be able to deal with those. But in terms of our approach is still going through the channel partners and working with them that they're already providing the services to those smaller organizations. So no, I don't think they'll be left alone, left by themselves.
Great stuff. Any final tips for a company that doesn't have their arms around this yet?
They're welcome to reach out to us, one of our partners, and we'll be happy to help. We'll be happy to also provide some guidance, some advice, and just have an interesting conversation and see how we can potentially work together.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.